Welcome back to our daily show. Here's CJ. Welcome back, 10:13 on this Wednesday morning here. It's the 27th day of March. Mark McCurties, did I get that right, sir?
You did, that's correct.
I always botch something, Mark, before I start the interview off. Mark McCurties joins us now on April the 2nd at Post Commons. A great conversation. The joy of beginning with God will be taking place. Mark, how are we doing this morning?
Doing really well, and I appreciate you making time for me on your show.
Oh, no problem. So fill me in at 7 p.m. at Post Commons, correct? You will be giving a lecture, a presentation, and fill me in on what this is all about.
Yeah, it's a lecture that's being sponsored by a local Christian Science church, First Church of Christ Scientist, Alton Godfrey. And they've asked me to come to the community to give a talk about the power and presence of God's healing and saving love. And so it's entitled The Joy of Beginning with God. And we're going to learn a little bit more about how we can and should begin with God and what that does to bring help, hope, and healing into our everyday lives.
And Mark, fill me in on a little bit of more about your background. Have you had many opportunities, I'm sure, to go and speak to numerous folks around the country about this very important topic?
Yes, I'm authorized by the Christian Science Church to give talks like this around the country and around the world. And so I've been doing this actually for about 10 years now, and I've been a lot of places. I actually used to live in the area. My wife was a professor at nearby Principia College, and so we are familiar with Elsa and Alton and Godfrey and kind of the surrounding St. Louis area. And so it's special to come back and have an opportunity to speak in this community.
And take me through this speaking engagement. When you start off, what is the audience going to expect in the first couple of minutes of your presentation on the 2nd of April?
Yeah, I think right away we're going to get a sense of the power and presence of God's love, of God's goodness, the availability of God's goodness in our everyday experience. I think that's part of what I want people to know. There's such a sense of, I think, heaviness when we look at the world sometimes today, all that's going on, the news that we're taking in. And I want people to know, to be uplifted by this promise that God is good and that God's love and goodness belongs to each and every one of us. So I think right up front, we'll get into some ideas that can provide hope for the world that we're living in right now.
Well, and on top of that too, Mark, for any individual that says, I want to hear this, I'm not a part of the, Christian Science branch of the religion, but I still am religious. I practice my faith. Is this open for multiple denominations to come and be a part of this?
Yeah, great question. It is absolutely open to one and all. This is not specific to a particular religion. These are ideas that in many ways are universal. God's love, God's goodness, God's healing and saving power. These are universal concepts of finding more hope, finding ways to learn more about your relationship to God. These are things that I think people from all walks of life might be interested in and can certainly relate to.
Well, and Mark, on top of this all, I'd be remiss not to talk about, all the conflicts going on and, that did go on in Israel and the, attacks over there, and then what's going on in Russia. Whenever you have, or in Ukraine, when you have all these outside interferences or distractors or, just, quite frankly, just bad situations, do you see an uptick in folks saying, now's the time to really get connected. There's something going on and I need to find my spot next to my religion? Is that what you get a lot whenever you see some of these upticks in violence and just all the static and craziness that's going on in the world?
Yeah, I think that's a great insight. There certainly is a desire to feel a greater connection to something higher and bigger than just ourselves. People are turning to religion, turning to God, turning to some support system. I think more than anything, people want to feel
Yeah.
supported. They want to feel comforted. They want to feel like there's hope. And so I've certainly in the last, I'd say, few years, really since COVID, seen people turning more and more with open arms to the possibility that they're going to need some kind of help and answers beyond just themselves and their own kind of human abilities and human resources.
Absolutely. And then, Mark, on top of that, I did want to make a note for anyone that wants to be a part of this, but maybe is a younger family out there and doesn't know who's going to watch the little one. I did see that childcare will be available during this presentation. And how long will this speaking engagement be going on for, Mark?
Yeah, it's about an hour long talk, and so there will be childcare if children are too young to attend the talk in person, but we want to do everything we can to make it as accessible and available to the public as possible.
And while you're giving these speaking engagements, Mark, and while you're presenting, what are some of your takeaways from your audience? Because in different locations throughout the country, I'm sure that an audience could maybe like something a little bit more than another group, and vice versa. Take me through that. When you're watching the audience and watching them engage, what are some of the points that you've made that they've really been engaged with?
Yeah, that's a great question. Audiences are different from place to place, community to community. And so I think more than anything, what people walk away with feeling hopeful about or feeling a sense of inspiration or appreciation is this idea of a little bit more clarity on how they can understand their relationship to God and a little more clarity on how they can see God's healing power and presence being a force for good in their own lives. I think there's so much conversation about God and what is God. And one of the things that I've come to learn and appreciate is that, of course, God is love, as the Bible tells us, but that God's love is practical, that God's love isn't a distant thing. It's not something that is destined for a future time and a future date, but that God's love is here and now. And so I think what people really respond to is a maybe just a little more understanding, a glimmer of hope about the availability of God's love today in this time, in this moment, in their lives and in our world. And so I hope that that's something that everybody can leave the lecture feeling a little more confident in
I
that.
want to follow up on that point, and because this is something that I've talked to with folks of different denominations, because regardless of what branch or what what we believe in, what our religious belief is, it seems like that folks they don't let themselves accept that love. If you get what I'm saying, we kind of maybe tense up a little bit. We kind of shutter the doors and we kind of close our hearts off in the most appropriate way to kind of just keep pushing through the day. And in your experience, when you've seen someone really open their heart up to a higher power, to God, what do you notice in their mentality right afterwards? Because it seems like from whenever I've been a part of those situations, just kind of seeing those couple of seconds of I'm doing this, it's a vulnerable moment for some people, and also a very uplifting one from what I've been able to experience. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, good question. I think one of the things that I've seen in different folks as they've kind of become more maybe awake to or accepting of God's love is that they often find themselves at a place of I wouldn't necessarily say that it's always desperation, but they're really searching. Something has driven them, something has compelled them. And I think that in the last few years, again, maybe kind of in this COVID and post-COVID period, we've seen a lot of people really driven to find answers and to find help and healing and stability in a way that they can really depend on. And so I think it's oftentimes our most kind of extreme situations, the time when maybe life feels the darkest, that we're of course looking for light. We're looking for safe ground to stand on. And so I think a lot of people have been reaching that place. And when they find that there are answers, when they find that there's something reliable and dependable and safe and comforting, there is an element of, I think, newfound joy. I like to think a lot about the Bible talks about this concept of the new birth or being born again, and I love that concept. It's like you begin to identify and discover yourself in a new way that's really special and profound.
And Mark, I would be remiss not to ask you about your joy of beginning with God. I got to ask you about that. Were you someone that always practiced your faith? Was this something that you fell into? Take me through your background and your religious pursuit.
Yeah. So I grew up in a Christian Science home. Both my parents were Christian
Hmm.
Scientists, which meant that every Sunday I'd go to Sunday school. And one of my favorite things, and still is one of my favorite things, was learning about what was going on in the Bible. I love Bible stories. I love learning about the men and women in the Bible who were facing some pretty difficult stuff sometimes, but found that no matter what the adversity was, sort of no matter what the odds were, that they could rely on, they could depend on God's healing and saving love to deliver them, to meet their needs, to keep them safe, to restore their health. And so growing up with that foundation of really loving the Bible and then seeing that the Bible is just as alive and practical and relevant today as it was for those men and women centuries ago was a really inspiring thing to me. And so as I grew up and came into my own as an adult, I wanted to really make this central to my life work and my life mission, and that is talking about and sharing and living this active biblical sense of God's love and goodness that's available to one and all. And so it was a special thing to kind of grow up going to Sunday school and reading these Bible stories, and now to have an opportunity to talk about the Bible and God's healing and saving power with audiences around the world has been a really full circle and special experience.
100%. And Mark, as we keep talking here a little bit more, I wanted to ask: is there going to be a point where maybe some of the folks in attendance could ask some questions to you? Is there a Q&A portion, or is this just going to be a lecture?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I usually do is invite people to come on up and visit with me in person after the lecture and ask questions that way.
Okay.
I found oftentimes after the lecture that people have really great, but sometimes they're very personal or
Yeah.
sensitive questions, and so I like to give them the space to be able to visit with me one-on-one after the lecture if they'd like to do that. I also know and am confident that members of the Alton Godfrey Christian Science Church will be on hand and available to ask questions. And I think in that sense, they'll be able to talk about more specific local Christian Science activities and things going on in the church. So there'll be lots of people who are ready and happy to answer further questions.
Absolutely. And Mark, I just want to thank you so much for your time. I hope that your trip back to Alton goes as well as it can and you're ready to come home a little bit and see some of the sights and sounds. Where are you currently located?
I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Oh, wow. So you're next to the big stadium, huh?
I am just down the road from the big house, as we call it
Oh
here.
man, I'm telling you what, I saw I've never been, but I went through and did a 3D map walkthrough of the big stadium and the big field that are, what do you call it up there?
The big
The
house.
big house, that's right. And man, that's just overwhelming. I mean, that is really overwhelming. But all I know is when you're always talking about the message of the Lord that Post Commons will become the big house on the 2nd of April at 7 p.m.
Well said.
What time should folks stop by and get ready for the presentation? What do you advise?
Yeah, I think that the presentation will start at 7, but I think, getting to the Post Commons 10 minutes early is fine. But you know what? If someone is running a little bit late, it really won't matter when they show up. If they come through the doors, there'll be something there that's wonderful and uplifting and healing. So come when you can, and you'll be welcomed with open arms.
And Mark, thank you so much for your time. I hope the presentation goes well. And for more information, what's the best way for people to get it?
Yeah, I would recommend visiting the Alton Godfrey Christian Science Church's website, and that's csalton.org. They've
Awesome.
got a great website, yeah, with more information, and they can not only tell you about the lecture, but also about local Christian Science activities there in your Alton community.
100%. And Mark McCurties will be presenting The Joy of Beginning with God April the 2nd at 7 p.m. at Post Commons. But before we take a quick break, I do have to get through a little bit of business. Mark, I got a question to ask you. Do you do
Sure.
the landscaping at your own home? Do you have somebody that does it, or is that something you do on your own?
Yeah, I live in an apartment. My wife and I are in an apartment, so somebody else takes care of the landscaping at this point.
Really cool. Well, some folks around here don't have to take care, but if you do, Mark, I'm a big old school guy. I love somebody that when you call them on the phone, they're the ones who answers. They're the business operator. They're the owner, and they're there for you, giving us that old school feeling of true blue collar hard work. And Ethan Holmes with Holmes Outdoor Service does just that. If you give Ethan a ring at 618-670-9843, that's 618-670-9843, you'll be connected to a local individual, local company that lives and loves local for your landscaping needs. Maybe you need some rock put in your driveway. Maybe you need some more detailed projects. Holmes Outdoor Service does it all. 618-670-9843. And don't forget to tell them that CJ sent you their way. Mark, thank you so much for your time. Best of luck on the 2nd of April. And I hope we get to talk again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time today, CJ. It's been a pleasure.
At 10:29, we will take a quick break, and we'll come back with Kristen Burns and Company, Wood River Business Alliance, Wood River Main Street, and so much more happening in the city. We'll find out more after this.